Glad you could join us on National Caramel Popcorn Day. That's a pretty good one. And it's not an extra points day, because every time I try to discuss these snacks with Shane, he hasn't had them in like 25 years. So I've got Dan in studio, and I'll bet maybe he's had some kind of popcorn. Are you a popcorn guy, Dan?
I like movie theater popcorn, a couple handfuls, but every year we get caramel popcorn for Christmas in the big tin, and I never touch it, and nobody eats it, and I don't know why we keep giving this away as a gift or getting it, but
well, I think there's like one tin, and it just gets circulated around, like it gets given to you, and then you re-gift it to somebody else, and it's just like the same tin. It's just going around like the fruitcakes.
I think there was one year we got one, like it's divided into 3 flavors. And
yeah,
like one of the flavors was missing, and that might have been the most embarrassing gift. The cheese one's gone. Okay.
So in the re-gifting process, they had eaten the flavor that they liked.
Yes.
Well, because that was going to be my question for the day, because since it's caramel popcorn, is your favorite flavor of popcorn? I feel like that's what we should ask the guest.
Yeah, I think that's what. How do you enjoy popcorn? Because like I said, at the movie theater, fresh popped like that. The smell is good, but I don't like eat a whole bag. I can only eat a little bit.
Oh, I'm with you. Like, I don't want to ever order movie theater popcorn on my own, because I won't eat a whole bag or bucket of it. I want somebody else to, and then I'll have like one handful of it, and then I'm kind of good.
Yeah.
I have a couple different threads. I'm going to go down here because you're making me think of a couple different things. They do have. So do you remember when they had the all-you-can-eat buckets at a local theater here?
Yeah,
I don't know which
have,
one
the
it
Avengers
is. So.
For the summer, or and then you get that bucket for the whole summer.
Yeah,
like October. I think we did that one year.
That was a very popular family gift.
Yeah,
that my dad would just give out buckets to everybody, and that was very popular. And
that's
then
not bad.
Well, then people would just go to the movie theater and just fill up the popcorn bucket. Like my brother-in-law, just like would go there and fill up his popcorn bucket. He wouldn't go to a movie.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, I think they got a lot of use out of it, especially if you have kids and stuff like that. So that makes me think of that. I also now I want to ask the guests though, have they gotten that 3 flavor regular, cheddar, and caramel or whatever that we're talking about? Because I do feel like it goes around.
It does.
I did get one this year. He's probably not listening, so that's okay. My nephew got me one of those for this year, and it was like, how am I, as one singular guy, gonna eat this massive tin of popcorn? Like, it was a very nice gift. Well, I appreciated the thought that he put into it.
If we get it in the season, early in the season, we'll bring it to parties, like, and leave it out like as part of the food selection.
That's good.
But other than that, I don't know. I just don't eat that. I get it. It's nice, but and we have a couple tins that were kind of cute, but other than that, stop giving out popcorn.
Well, I bring it into work, but sometimes the popcorn comes from work. So then everybody gets one, and then everybody has to, they can't bring in their tin because it came from work.
Is there a break room where you can just write free?
Because then it'd be like, wait, we got 5 tins of popcorn. Oh, they all came from the one guy.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But so I do want to know that. And there are a lot more flavors of popcorn now, and ways, like, to your point, of consuming popcorn, I guess. Do you make it over the stove?
Yeah,
like old school style.
I've actually, in my day job, have had to turn it. Like, there are these people who come with like these big bag of popcorns, and they sell it for charity. And then, like I've said, no, I appreciate what you're doing. Like, one time I bought one and just let everyone have it. But then you like see them walk across the street to the other restaurant, walk to the flower shop, and like I'm wondering if it's real or not. But it's not like they're asking for a lot of money.
Right.
But it's just,
And they still gave you something. But then it's like, where did this popcorn actually come
a sealed
from?
Bag with like a logo. I forget what it was, but I've seen it multiple times now. I think it might be a legitimate charity, but I don't know. It always seems like the guys who are raising the money have a little bit more of a hustler vibe than that I'm like, this feels less charitable and more like a side business.
Yeah. Well, the charity is the Human Fund for all the Seinfeld fans out there.
A generous donation to the Human
Fund. Exactly. But yeah, well, that's how I feel when kids are selling those candy bars. Whenever it's candy bars that they're selling, I'm always like, this is probably not. This is probably just like they went and bought candy bars at the store and they're reselling them. For a margin.
For sure. That is 100%. At least like when it's like a niece or nephew at like a kid's school bake sale, that at least is legit. Or Girl Scout cookies, even then, you know where that's going.
That's a classic one, yeah. And even when they have a table with the Girl Scout cookies, you figure that's somehow going to the Girl Scouts, outside of the. But then if it's your buddies that drop off the popcorn, then you get a little worried. Like, which one of you is in the Girl Scouts? You're both 45-year-old men. What are you doing out here?
Yeah, that is an interesting dilemma, but. Yeah.
Well, we covered almost. We did like 7 minutes on popcorn, so that's pretty good.
Yep.
There is kind of a big game coming up today. I figured we'd probably talk about it some in the last segment, but I'm supposed to reference the fact that our other show here, other sports host, the sports professor Steve Project, he put out a little game. I think you can probably still get into it, so check out his page on Facebook to see some score estimates and see who gets the closest, and the closest gets a prize here.
Yep.
There's a lot of Michigan ones. I feel like somebody's got to come in and predict UConn just to kind
UConn
of
right now 78-74. All right,
you got it. I mean, because you just got to play against. I mean, Michigan's going to be saturated. It's going to be like 50 Michigans.
It's like if the favorite won every time, there would be no sports gambling. So
I admittedly did pick Michigan in my bracket, but I did think they were the most likely to win. I had two Final Four teams, and my other two Final Four teams lost in the Elite Eight. So I feel like that's pretty good because I had Purdue winning, which I knew was an upset, but that was pretty close because they got to the Elite Eight and then lost to Arizona. Illinois was my other Final Four team, so I was happy.
That was a good pick.
I was happy with that one being correct. UConn, I can see why they made it. I didn't have them going this far, but that's more because I just didn't really root for them to get this far.
It's like everyone's like, oh, Michigan's so much better. It's like I think UConn lost 5 games this year. Like it's weird how college basketball, it's like one can be viewed as the overwhelming favorite. I guess it's probably style of victory because Michigan cruised, what was it, even almost 20 points against who did they play?
Arizona.
And like Tennessee, they crushed. So it's like UConn winning when they almost blew a big lead and then had to come back from a same big lead. That I get it, but it's just Michigan. They're not that much better. I mean, they're a good team.
No, and there's a reason that they'd be favored. But one of the things that I've noticed over the course of the season, because I have watched all of their games for the show because we've been covering them pretty consistently, is the fact that when LJ Kaysen got hurt, that it would seem like their margin of victory went down. I know he was a bench player, but he was a combo guard that was really important off the bench.
Yes.
He was really thriving. He was starting to shoot well from 3. He was a pretty good defender. They were putting him on some of the better players on the other team, and he was leading kind of like a fast break style that was wearing people out, I think. And so then when you've got the huge front line of basically whoever, I don't know even who they have slotted into small forward, I guess Landenberg, but like you've got Mara and Johnson, all those guys are 4s and 5s, and then so you're wearing people out with that. Then you're getting a guy off the bench that then wants to run with some of the bench guys that are also good,
right?
And I think that was wearing teams out. That's why they were blowing teams out as soon as he went out. They were not blowing. They were still winning, but they were not blowing teams out like they lost. I think that game that he got hurt,
right?
And then they were not winning by the same margin of victory. I think they've righted the ship by now.
The evidence suggests they have.
Yeah, but because they still have Trey McKinney off the bench. I mean, that's a 5-star recruit that would probably start on most other teams, and if you put him on, say, Michigan State, not that I'm calling them out, but he plays shooting guard. They had trouble at shooting guard this year. He would have been a star probably on that team, and he would have even started on probably even an Izzo team who's resistant to starting freshmen. But he started Jordan Scott this year.
Yeah, he's usually resistant to starting freshmen in November and December. But once the freshman proves to be the best one for the job, like last year he did it with Jace Richardson, and then Jordan Scott down the stretch. I know some injuries played a factor because they had like 3 guys go out, so that's part of it. But yeah, I was also. What do you think of this storyline? UConn center played for Michigan, right? Didn't he start his college career at Michigan, or transferred over?
That Terrace. Are you talking about Terrace Reed?
Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah, he's been dominant in the tournament too. He's been very good. And I mean, they do have a pretty good front line at UConn, because that's kind of the thing that also wears people down from Michigan, because you are basically playing just versatile. You're basically playing 2 4s and a 5, and really all of them could pass as a 5 in college. Like in some like when he was at UAB, Yaxel was playing more of a 5,
right?
And then Morris Johnson was playing kind of big until they got all of the, what do they call those? I think it's the Balkan 5. I like that as a nickname.
That is a good one
from Illinois. So then he was kind of edged out of the equation and went over to Michigan. But yeah, they're all big men, but then they play one of them at the 3 essentially. But you just have to deal with all of them. But UConn's they've got a good front court. They've got Reed, they've got Caravan. He's been hitting from the outside. He's very experienced. He's got the most tournament experience of anybody there. So I think it could be an interesting game. It is kind of the coach. I think I saw somewhere that it was the GOAT coach versus like the unstoppable team kind of thing. But UConn's got a good team too. They shouldn't be counted out.
Right. No, I just feel like because of the way they won a couple of these games, that factored into everyone making Michigan such a favorite. And I think it's going to be a very close game.
UConn does have a tendency to hang around, and I think Michigan's going to have a harder time blowing them out. But we'll see. The game will be kind of just starting as we're going off air. Right. Thankfully, we're not competing against it, so people will be listening to us and then go watch the game, which will be fun. But yeah, we're going to get into our interview segments here. We're going to talk with Jerry Mackinem of the Tigers Minor League Report and kick off with some baseball, because the baseball season is upon us, and it seems like everybody's kind of doom and gloom already. I don't know. I was going to talk to Jerry about that. It seems kind of negative for however many games in we are. We're only a couple series in.
It's the same energy about the Red Wings making a trade, the Lions signing a free agent. I don't know what it is, but it's like it's a long season. Long season.
And we take a different approach on this show, I realize, as opposed to some of the other sports radio programming that people normally listen to. So I get it, but it's kind of, it seemed very negative very quick. But there's some good things about this team for sure. So we'll talk to Jerry about some of the advanced statistics, because they get into a lot of in-depth details, and we'll bring him on after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're happy to bring on this next guest. He always does a very good job covering baseball for us. He was, I think, our first baseball pundit on the show, actually. Fun fact. And so I always like bringing him on. And this is Jerry Mackinem of Tigers Minor League Report. Now, Jerry, you know how this goes. We always like to ask the question of the day, celebrate the thing of the day. So it's National Caramel Popcorn Day. So I kind of have 2 questions for you. One is, what's your favorite kind of popcorn or way to enjoy popcorn?
Ooh, I don't think there's a wrong way to enjoy popcorn. My personal favorite is white cheddar, though. That's just every time that hits good.
That's a classic. Now, that does lead me into the second question, which is, have you ever gotten the tin at Christmas with the 3 flavors, where it's got like the white cheddar, the butter, and the caramel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you got to take a little bit from each one. You got to take turns. That way you don't get tired of one, right? So you get the nice mixture in there.
Wait, so you go bite for bite, or you have them separately in kind of rationed amounts? You do them together?
Yep, I'll grab a little bit from each and toss it all in my mouth.
That's a good way to do it. Now, do you mix candy into the mix? Because that's a classic movie theater format, where you like take like a peanut butter cup and then you put it with some popcorn.
Every now and then. Okay. Yeah, I like the classic, like, M&Ms.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, Dan and I are convinced that that same tin is just being passed around. The one that everybody gets at Christmas, it's just one tin. Everybody's like, you take it this year, and then I'll get it next year, and then you have it for a year.
Right.
But no, I'm glad we could ask you that. But we gotta talk to you about some baseball, because this is what I was telling Dan when we were introducing the segment in the first segment here. It's funny to me, and you're used to this. You've been covering baseball for a while, and you're very familiar with baseball. You have a very in-depth knowledge of it. But I know how fans are, and we talk about that on the shows, and we try to handle it a little bit differently and be more informational and not quite as volatile. But it's just funny to me. The season just started, and I feel like everybody's bummed already. And it's not. It's like there's a lot of good stuff going on here with the season, but I feel like there's a general malaise already. I'm like, it's too long of a season for this. We got to get pumped up here. This is baseball's back. This is a fun time of year.
Yeah, exactly. This is the time we've been waiting for. We've wanted this day to come for so long. We have to try and enjoy it. And I can't say I'm too far away from. There's been a few times already this season where I'm kind of bummed out, and but you can't help it. You want your team to win. And when you see them slightly below 500 so early, it's like, oh, come on, guys. What are you doing?
I do get that. And, I feel like this term is used in football more so, especially it seemed like they used it a lot in the Lions locker room, specifically 2 years ago. They always talked about complementary football. They were big on complementary football. And I feel like this year, I feel like baseball is even more like that, because it's like, okay, obviously you do have two sides of the coin. If you're hitting, that's great, but your pitchers have got to be up to the task. They've got to be shutting people down, or you've got to be hitting and fielding to help supplement what the pitching staff is doing. But that's the way these first few games strike me. The first few series strike me here so far. It seems like it's not very complimentary baseball. It seems like one part's going well, and then it's like, okay, great. Well, we got a good appearance by the starting pitcher. Oh, we got some hitting. Oh, the bullpen's off today, or vice versa, or there's some fielding errors when other things are good. It's not that everything's falling apart at the same time, but it's a bit of a bummer when one of those facets costs you the game.
Right. You see each side of the game have some really good outings, and you can see it all come together and just know that this team's going to win. It's just now getting it to that point where that all actually comes together. Because you're right, there will be times where the hitting will come in and just dominates, and then suddenly the bullpen lets them back in, like we saw a couple days ago. Then there's other times where the hitting just goes completely cold, and you're like, come on, guys, we've seen these bats come to life. Where are you at right now? What's going on? And so I'm sure most of it's just, like you said, we're very early into the season. So they're all still trying to knock some of that rust off there, even with the spring training.
Yeah, that I tend to be very informational in my approach as far as like logical, like you've covered the game for a while. It's like, okay, at the beginning of the season, you're going to have a higher strikeout rate, or you're going to have people trying to find their pitch positioning and the sequencing and all different, like you're learning that along the way, because spring training does help you with some of that stuff, but you can't really truly get into some of it until you get into the live games and get those live reps. So part of it is that, but the inherent counter argument to what I just said is, well, all the teams are dealing with that, and they, some of the other ones are doing fine with that. But I think I think they'll trend the right way. I do like the acquisitions that they made in the offseason. I'm curious what you thought about the offseason, because you guys always have the perspective of the minor leagues, and you guys know better than anybody who's on their way up, so that's kind of where your focus is. But what did you think of kind of what they did in free agency, and how they filled out the team with kind of in the perspective of, well, we do have these prospects on their way, and obviously one major one made it to the major league roster.
Yeah, I actually liked their offseason. Initially, I was kind of concerned because, we had the same team for 2 years in a row, kind of stalled out the same spot in the playoffs. You look at it and you think, okay, we really need to make an improvement somewhere. And they didn't seem to really be making that big improvement. And then when they got Framber Valdez, it was like, okay, here we go. Now this is the kind of move they need to make. And then we get to spring training and suddenly McGonigal gets to make the team. You're like, now that's a bat that they really needed. So it took a while, but I think it got to the point where it needed to for them to take that next step and make it further in the playoffs, if not bring home a championship.
Well, they obviously focused on the pitching, as you said, the Valdez move. I feel like the Valdez move in concert with the Verlander move, although, you weren't really sure what you're going to get out of Verlander. Obviously, he's already got to take a little time off. He's older than me, Jerry. That's old. He's old. But it's impressive what he's been able to do here in his career, and that he has been able to stay in shape, and hopefully an injury this early in the year shouldn't be a concern as long as he's healthy at the right time, because you do have a guy like Cater Montero and then some of the other guys that are potentially coming down the pike, some of the younger guys, some of the guys that are hurt right now, like, if you can get some of these guys back. But I wanted to talk about one of your articles. I always like your articles and the articles on Tigers Minor League Report. We always push those out to the people because it's always great stuff. And you had a really interesting one, a very in-depth one about kind of the comparison between Montero and Valdez. So I wanted to talk to you about that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, thank you for spreading the word about us. We always appreciate that. And anytime we get someone to do that.
Oh, it's worth spread. I mean, you guys are kind of taking off too. Like it's been fun to see the progression, because you're in the press box. You're in Lakeland. I know Rogelio and Chris were in Lakeland, and you're really coming on the map here.
Yeah, it's a blast. I don't know. You get to do this. Your radio shows it's just a lot of fun. It's so cool.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's a worthwhile endeavor, and that's why I really want to push people to it. But you guys don't only cover the minor leagues, and so that's why I liked that article about Valdez and Montero, because I came up with a comparison in my mind, but I was curious if that was kind of on your mind when you wrote it, because you were talking about the idea that, okay, having a bit of a mentor, having somebody that's in tandem with him, it kind of reminded me of how Javi Baez was better when they added Torres to the team.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was kind of the idea. So with any acquisition, I like to immediately go out and kind of see the underlying metrics. Like with pitching, I want to go look and see what kind of movement their pitches have. What pitches do they throw? Spin rate, velocity, all of that. And when I did that with Framber, I'm looking at him like, I swear this is familiar to me from somewhere, and I just couldn't quite put my finger on. And then it struck me that it was Kiter. It looked just like Kiter, but from the other arm. I'm looking at it, and I was actually talking to Rogelio about it. I'm like, look at this. Like, am I crazy? Am I really reading this right? And he's like, yeah, those are really close. And also, it's very helpful for Kiter because, yeah, he's that mentor. He's that guy who's been here and done it for a while. He has the background. He can give Kiter the tips, say, hey, I throw this pitch in this situation because of this reason. And it's something that could really help push his development. And I think, too, like with Glaber and Javi, it helps that Framber's also a Spanish-speaking player. And that can help them get them closer together as well. And they have something to work on with each other there.
There is something to that, because I do think that's why and it's popular in baseball, but I think of other sports too. Hockey is kind of a popular sport for this, where once you get a guy from a certain region, then you start scouting that region more, and then you acquire players from that region, and then you realize, wait a minute, putting these guys together actually worked out pretty well, because they can kind of take their culture over here and still have a little bit more comfortable life, because they have somebody that they can share their traditions with, whether it's religious or cultural background and or language, and all of those things matter. I know they're moving to another country, and that's part of the deal, but those things do matter. Those off the field things do affect the way players play, and we don't always take that into circumstance. It's like when a player gets traded, they have to deal with all the things that that are involved in moving their lives over to a different region. Yeah, they're making more money than the average person, but they still have to deal with all those same things. They can't teleport over to the new location like they're in the Jetsons. They have to, they have to do all the things. They have to move their family and find a new house and get used to the new area. So it's the same thing, but kind of accelerated when you are coming from another country or speak a language that isn't English, and if you can have some cohorts in the clubhouse that understand you a little bit better. It doesn't always have to be somebody that speaks your language or comes from the same country, but just somebody that understands you better and you can be buddies with. I think that's going to make it more of a homey feel, which is what you need in baseball.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you really hit on it earlier about the comfort. If these guys are comfortable, they're going to be more relaxed, and that's going to allow them to be at their best. And yeah, everything you said is spot on. They're coming over. They're getting paid a lot of money to play this game that kids like to play, but also these are still people, and they still have to go through and deal with these issues of being away from their families and being so far away. And yeah, anything that you can do to bring a little bit of comfort to them, it has to help.
Definitely. And in baseball, those minor things make the most difference because, they call football the game of inches, but baseball is, that's the game of millimeters because you're talking about the strike zone, especially with the challenge system now, and you're talking about just being a little bit off on a swing or a pitch that is the difference between the perfect swing, the perfect pitch, and an out or a home run, depending on which side you're on. So those things matter, and you want to stack up as many of those things as you can. But I want to talk to you more about some of the young guys. Obviously, we got to talk about McGonigal because you guys have been profiling him, all the way through the minors. But I want to talk about some of the other guys that we may see and some of the ones that we didn't see after the break here. So we'll come back with Jerry Mackinem of Tigers Minor League Report. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Jerry Mackinem of the Tigers Minor League Report, having a good conversation about the Tigers and the fact that they're getting a bit younger here. Well, younger and older. I guess they added Verlander and other veterans, but we usually talk about the young guys with the Minor League Report guys. And obviously the main story is Kevin McGonigal. I had more. You guys have seen so much tape on him. You've been following him through his whole journey. Obviously, he was a top-rated prospect as soon as he got into the system, and he's just been performing at every level and moving up quickly. It was funny when they were getting him on to the team. It was like, this has got to be obvious, right? Like he was performing at every level, and with how professional the hitter he's been at every level, that was the part that I thought was very encouraging about the fact that even though he is young and it is a leap and all of those things, that he would be prepared, and so far so good on that. But I'm curious kind of how you saw that, because you've seen probably more games of his than 99% of people watching.
Yeah, I had hoped that he would make the opening day roster. I thought he was ready. I thought he could do it. I figured he probably would struggle initially, maybe the first couple weeks or so, just because all rookies struggle, and then he would pick it up. But he has come out of the gate and just hit like he's been a 10-year veteran.
It's amazing, but I go more off kind of like the personality and the character. I don't have the eye for the game like you do, and so I kind of boil it down to those things. And it just seemed like, okay, this guy's going to be a built-in professional from day one, and it seems that way. Not that he's going to have his slides, he's going to have his slumps just like everybody else, but I think he's going to be able to right the ship faster, which is really the key. Everybody, even the best hitters, have their slumps in the major leagues, but it's about getting yourself reset and out of those things sooner rather than later, so they don't compound for your season, for your team's season. It becomes contagious in the clubhouse, all those kinds of things. But I'm curious about some of the other young guys too, because obviously they had brought those three guys up together with each minor league level, McGonigal, Clark, and Briseño, and they finally separated them, because at some point it's inevitable that, okay, maybe this timing doesn't make as much sense for the other guys because of the positional situation at the major league level or their development, because again, they were all developing pretty fast. But it seems like Clark's wanting to come up and join his buddy. It seems like he misses his buddy.
Oh yeah, and he's off to a tremendous start too. He had 5 doubles this last week and 20 at bats. He's walking just a ton. I think his walk rate's at almost 19% right now. He's not striking out. He's doing what he needs to on defense. Yeah, I think he's trying really hard to make the decision difficult for this front office when to bring him up. He wants to be up here, and he wants to be up here now, I think.
It seems that way, and I'm kind of saying it tongue-in-cheek, obviously, with the fact that he wants to be with his buddy, but I'm sure he actually does, because they're kind of like an odd couple. I want to see like a buddy cop movie with those two, because they would be a perfect buddy cop movie, because McGonagall's like he's even though he's not older, but he's like the consistent, like, I've been here too long. He's like Murtaugh from Lethal Weapon, and he's getting tired of this stuff. He's been there too long. And then Clark is like the Riggs, running around and running into walls and jumping off of things. That's what they are. So we need to put them back together.
That's right. There's a photo out there somewhere when they made their way to Lakeland. They drove down together. So they've got to be as good of friends as you can be on a team. So I'm sure they both want Clark up to the big leagues.
Definitely. And you got to think that at some point, because it did seem like the strategy with this team was they did reinforce the pitching all the way around. We hit on the starters that were acquired, but they reinforced the bullpen. They found out about some of the young guys getting hurt. They already knew about Job, but then Olsen, and then obviously they didn't know about Melton until later in the process. But you had some young arms that you were hoping would factor in, or are hoping will factor in at some point in time, but the timeline is a little bit longer with them, so you're having to find guys to layer on top of them. So you got Verlander, who's going to have a little bit of a shorter lifespan with the team than, say, like a Valdez, who was the big acquisition. But I mean, I think as much as that spoke volumes, what they went after on the pitching staff, both for the starters and the relievers, getting Jansen and reinforcing the bullpen and acquiring some of the middle relief guys, they hardly made any moves on the batting side, and I took that to mean, okay, this is now much more likely that we see McGonagall, because we've got kind of a little bit of a not a hole, but a little bit of, we're a little bit off kilter on the left side of the infield, so McGonagall kind of solves that issue. And then, although the outfield situation was a little bit different than last year, you could see a world in which Clark kind of plays his way into the outfield, especially if they do have injury issues like they have had in the past in the outfield.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's not a real major hole in Clark's game. You could say that he doesn't quite have the power maybe that you would like to see, but that's really not going to stop him. He can hit it to all the field. His speed is going to get him more extra base hits than anything, and his defense is plus in my opinion. And I think he could play any of the 3 spots that they wanted to throw him at.
Definitely, and I think it's a 2-pronged thing that I was seeing with the lack of hitting and fielding acquisition in the off season, because I do think they're going to get some of these guys up, and Clark, for one, because he is kind of that buddy cop movie with McGonagall. He's his opposite. McGonagall is going to be the ultimate professional, very consistent. He's going to be the one that is going to be resistant to kind of being part of the slump and all of that. But I think Clark, he might be maybe a little bit more volatile, and I could see him maybe getting more into slumps, but I can see him also being the guy that his energy gets the whole team out of a slump, because of how he plays and the energy that he plays with and the personality that he has. So those guys are valuable too, especially to balance each other out like they do in the buddy cop movie that we're going to write eventually. And but I also think that they're going to survey, because they have a plethora of resources in the minor leagues, as you guys know better than anybody. So I thought the second part of that plan was, let's see who we pull up from the minor leagues. Let's see if McGonigal plays his way in, which he did. Clark seems to be headed the same way eventually when they've got a spot and they think he's ready. And then they've got a bunch of resources to say, okay, what are we going to do at the trade deadline? Do we need to get a veteran bat to help us down the stretch, which we really didn't get last year? Obviously, it's too soon to have that conversation, but that's kind of the twofold plan that I saw with the way they handled the offseason.
Right, absolutely. And it could be something like what they did last trade deadline, where they go get a couple of veterans for some guys in the lower minors who are probably more depth than they are starters at the next level. And they have many of those guys that they could use to do that. But they also have some star power that they could leverage if they really wanted to go out and get somebody big. I mean, yeah, we talk about, Clark, McGonigal, and Briseño, but Lorenzo's not too bad of a prospect himself. There's Bryce Rayner down in the Lakeland right now. They have some names that they could use. What they do and how they use it, I'm not sure. They could feel that the talent is good enough that they will just keep it around and just continue to get the guys like Charlie Morton last year, or someone like that. But you're right. Yeah, they have different various levels of talent in there to go make any move that they would want to.
And they have a good problem, which is some of these positions, they don't have a lot of headroom in them. In baseball, you've got to be able to progress. And if you're kind of blocked above you, then it's going to be hard to kind of break your way through unless you are a McGonigal. It doesn't really matter who's at the major league level. You're going to find a way, okay, let's play him at third. Let's play him at short sometimes, and we'll move people around. Clark will probably eventually be the same way, that even if they like their outfielders, they may pull them up. But there's going to be other guys that won't be quite as strong to pull up, but they're of value, so maybe they're more valuable as trade chips. But I did have one other question I want to ask you, because you guys are the ones that kind of inform me about the younger guys, and so I know the names typically before they're called up because I follow the minor league report. But I was wondering if you were surprised that Dylan Smith was the one that was kind of caught in between, and that they ended up kind of losing him in all of this, because I thought they were kind of higher on him, but between Smith and Lee, those were two arms that I was surprised they kind of let walk, either through trade or through designating them.
Dylan Smith really surprised me. I thought they would want to keep him around. He showed some potential, at least some upside there, that maybe, some of the other guys towards the back end of the 40 that are, the journeymen that I thought they would get rid of before him. So that one really surprised me. But I was also surprised when they removed Tyler Madison off of the 40 too, because I feel like he has a lot of upside. Luckily, they were able to keep him in the system. But, yeah, there's been a couple of those relievers that I thought had upside and would be good, even if, just back up for this year, if not actually making an impact in the bullpen this year, that they have gotten rid of. And the data to me says that they're good and they're upside. I'm not sure what the team themselves are seeing. But, yeah, there's a couple of them that kind of made me raise my eyebrow a little bit and wonder what the plan was.
Well, and as you know better than anybody, Jerry, it's also a combination between, like, okay, who can we sneak down? We do believe in this guy, but who can we sneak down and they won't get poached by another team? And maybe that was the situation with Smith. They said, okay, yeah, we can sneak him down, and then, oh, whoops, I guess we were wrong about that one. But when you do have, this is, they have a better team now, and we talk about this a lot on the show, that like when your team situation is different, the Lions are the best example of this, although the Tigers are a good example too. But when you have a better team, you have different kinds of problems. You instead of being the team waiting for everybody else to cut their guys so that you can try to get some values and say, okay, well, this is better than what we have. The Tigers are now some of the folks forced into tougher decisions because they've got a lot of depth and they've got a lot of talent at every level, and that's a good problem to have. But also that means that there might be another team that says, yeah, he might not make your 40, but we think he's going to make our 40.
Yeah, absolutely. And Akil Baddoo and Justin Henry Malloy are another examples of that. They are guys that, again, they may not be stars and they may not have made our team right out of it, but there's enough upside there for other teams to go, yeah, we might as well take a try. I mean, what's it going to hurt? If we have space on our 40, they have at least one tool that we can work with. Let's give it a go. And then, it sucks that you lose some fan favorites like that, but you're right. That's just a part of getting better. You're going to start losing some of these guys because you have so much talent.
Yeah, like I said, it's a good problem to have, but that's why my mind kind of goes to the trade, because then you maximize the potential. You say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to maximize the potential of all these guys because they're going to be blocked. They're not going to make our 40-man roster. They're not going to be able to progress through the system like they would in other systems. So let's consolidate and turn them into a bigger asset. But we'll have that conversation more down the road as we get closer to the trade deadline and see how things level out here. Because this is a good roster and it's going to be fun to watch how they develop and come together here. But we appreciate you coming on and kind of giving your early thoughts on the season and the off season. And I want to make sure to direct people to where they can follow all your guys' great coverage here.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a blast every time you get us on there, and I love doing it. And anytime you want, Tigers Minor League Report. We'll be out there and doing all the fun stuff.
Yeah, be sure to follow them. The podcasts are taking off too, and there's a lot of different levels to it. And so be sure to follow them on all the levels. But go to TigersMinorLeagueReport.com and check everything out. But appreciate you joining the show, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon here, Jerry.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Talk to you later. Thanks to Jerry Mackinem. Great stuff. Kicking off with baseball here. We're going to turn our attention to hockey. That's another one that people aren't necessarily super excited about, but they're still in the playoff hunt. They've still had a pretty decent season that we have to kind of remind people. Their point total has been pretty good. It's just that it's been a competitive conference here, and that they're trying to get their way into the wild card, and everybody's kind of winning and losing at the same time. But we'll talk about that with Ryan Randall of the Grind Line podcast. I've listened to the podcast recently, and he's I don't know. We'll see what his level of hope is here, but we'll get him on and talk to him about his hope level and what he thinks about this team here. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. This is Ryan Randall of the Grind Line podcast. Like the podcast a lot. Got a lot of good information there. But as you know from being on the show, Ryan, we like to celebrate the thing of the day. And maybe this will cheer you up, because I listened to the last podcast and we're going to try to cheer people up, but we're also going to be authentic about what's going on too. But we're celebrating National Caramel Popcorn Day, and I'm curious what your favorite kind of popcorn is, or how you enjoy popcorn. There's layers to this.
I mean, if we're going the popcorn route, it's got to be kettle corn.
That's a good choice. That has not been mentioned yet. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's
really
not yet. We talked about, so we mainly focused in the first segment, me and my producer Dan, we talked about that tin that you get at Christmas that has like the white cheddar, butter, and the caramel, and we were convinced that there's just one of those tins that just circulates and everybody gets it. They just like pass it around, like, here, you take it for this year, and then don't eat it, and then regift it to somebody else.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with that one. I mean, that's typically got your caramel, it's got your white cheddar. I mean, the third one's always the kind of the unknown, right? Depending on what brand you pick out. But if there's kettle corn in there, you can sign me up all day.
Well, that's the thing, because Kettle Corn has been the stronger riser over time. Like, though I think those were kind of more original. I think I didn't do too much research for the popcorn, but I always go more in depth than people would guess. But obviously, it started with the butter, and then I think white cheddar or caramel were kind of next. I feel like those three flavors are paired together because those are kind of the originals. But but then again, kettle corn has been like the stock. It's been more exponential for kettle corn. It may have started lower, but it's skyrocketed. So I feel like it's in the top 3 now. I feel like it's got to be in that tin.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. Especially, I mean, you go with the old default of Cracker Jack. I mean, I love the fact when you get mix the nuts in with the caramel and all that stuff. So there's a lot of ways you can go. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I love just a simple popcorn in the microwave heat up. But if you got kettle corn you're throwing out in front of me, I'm buying it.
That's a good pick. I'm glad we brought that one up because that's a new one, and I was thinking about that in the first segment, but we didn't talk about it. But now that we've cheered everybody up and talked about Cracker Jacks and kettle corn and fun things, let's get, because I was on a flight today and I listened to the most recent podcast while I was on the flight because I realized I hadn't listened to the most recent episode, and I wanted to do that in order to talk with you, and I was like, oh, well, their feelings on this kind of match the probably the audience's feelings. I have a tendency to probably be a little too chipper for people sometimes with this because I'm always trying to calm people down. But the reality is this stretch is not going too well. That's a reality that we have to embrace. And so there's booze coming down, and this. I mean, they were so close, but it does feel like. It feels like they're just following what everybody else is doing. It's like when everybody was winning, they weren't gaining anything, and then now everybody's losing together. But it's like they're staying in that same position where they're just barely on the outside looking in, where the odds are kind of dwindling as we head to, the hopeful playoff run. But the hopes are dwindling.
They're dwindling. They're not fully dead, which I guess is the positive spin on everything, because they're 2 points back right now as it stands. But when you look at the body of work up to this point, as you probably have seen plenty on the interwebs, the fan base faith has gone and plummeted pretty much to zero. And it's just like, I kind of relate everything back to right before the Olympics start. Up through January 24th, this team was on an absolute tear. And then they had that 3-game losing streak that brought them in. That's about the time when Edvinson went down. And things just from that point forward haven't been quite right. Even coming back from the Olympic break, they had a couple back and forth with wins and losses. But then, as everyone very well know, the month of March came, the Ides of March, and they're stringing together more losses than wins at this point. And the biggest thing that's been highlighted of late, and something that we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast, is they've always had several games in hand on all these teams that they've been keeping just ahead of. And really the last 2 weeks, that kind of all came to a head where the games played started to align and the points kind of started to fall to the wayside. And there's certain games you can even point to in the last couple of weeks where you're just like, yeah, if they won this one or that one, they're probably about 6 points up and they're safely in a spot right now. And they just have to not fall apart the last 5 games. But unfortunately, they basically have to win out to even give themselves a remote chance.
And I could see why the fan base and why you guys wouldn't be that confident in that, because there's really no evidence that shows you, okay, yeah, they're going to turn it on, because unfortunately that kind of thing kind of seeping in has not motivated them. Now they're talking about how that may be affecting the locker room. Yeah. And it's like, but you gotta rise above, guys. I mean, that's an unfortunate part of the process. I don't always love that part of the process. We talk about that on our other show a lot because I co-host with Shane Graham, who was a kicker, and kickers inevitably deal with a lot of that kind of stuff, and he just had to ignore all of it. And he talks about how he worked, a lot of his work was really more on mindset, because you just have to block it out or let it motivate you, one or the two, but you can't let it bury you.
Yeah, and I think it's a damning indictment of the team at the moment based on some of the comments you saw last night. And I think the ones that are getting a lot of steam are from Andrew Kopp and JT Compher, where I'm summarizing Compher's comments a little bit here. I don't have those directly in front of me, but he the quote that stood out to a lot of people is that it is what it is. But it was more in reference to what's happening around them, the fact that you kind of alluded to, that the teams aren't losing when Detroit was winning. Now all the teams are winning while Detroit is losing, or there's just that stagnant thing going on for the group. But then you go look at Andrew Kopp, and this one's also put a lot out there, and I think this is what you were hinting at, is that they're seemingly letting the noise get to them now. You've got a very upset fan base, and if you're watching that game against Minnesota come the end of the second period, the boos were mighty loud. I'll give them props for fighting back in the third, but at the same point, it's like, where was that for the other 40 minutes of the game? And really, they didn't show up until the last 10 minutes, arguably. And the problem you run into is that it isn't just isolated to one game. I mean, they had an awful effort against the worst team in the East right before that with the Rangers. You come out against Philly on the road, a team you hadn't beat in regulation in Philadelphia since I think it was 1998, and you put on one of your best performances the last couple of weeks, outside maybe the Buffalo game. So, like, which one are you going to get from this team as a fan when you're watching? Like, you know what they can do in terms of play with some of the top teams, go out there and put on a fantastic performance, but then you've got the last two games where you're just like, do you expect me to think this is a playoff caliber roster, which they showed they could be for half the season? So it's just a very frustrating moment where you want to go crazy with your support for the group, but then you have the last two performances and you start to question those things and how those things can play into the final 5 games.
Exactly. And if you're a Detroit fan too, I do understand this part of it. If you're a Detroit fan across the board, the part that we're usually we usually get as Detroit fans, whether it's Lions, Pistons, Tigers, whatever, is it's kind of all out effort. That's what's fun. We're going to cover Pistons in the next interview, but that's what's fun about watching them is, yeah, they may not be the prettiest team. They don't have the best shooting percentage, but their effort never falters. Yes. That is always 100%. They are always either trying just as hard or harder than the other team. And it is tough to assess effort, and I'm not saying this is happening across the board with the Red Wings because there's clearly a lot of guys that are still putting in a lot of work and a lot of effort, but it doesn't feel like the same never say die kind of attitude with that squad as it is with the other Detroit squads.
Yeah, you look at you call out the Pistons, for instance. I mean, they were down 4 starters just as of the last couple of weeks, and they were still going out there and finding ways to win. They've been without Cade Cunningham for a couple of weeks now, who might be coming back very soon, sooner than expected. But you're just like, they're going out performing. I get it's a completely different style of game. You've got 5 to 8 guys you can typically rely upon for the NBA, but the fact still remains you got to care. Because when you go like the Tampa and Buffalo game is on right now, that is just a freaking F1 race right now in terms of the speed and intensity that those guys are playing with. And you've only seen that maybe a handful of times from this Detroit roster over the last several weeks. And as we're almost beating the horse to death at this point, that you just, where is it? Why can't it be there? Why can't you go out and show that you want to take this next step with this roster? Because I feel like they can make some noise, but it just, I don't know.
Well, there was that one week, it was a couple weeks ago, where it was kind of the start of this stretch where they were getting into kind of the playoff style games, and it looked like they were up to the task that week. Like I think they went 2-1, but it was like the effort level was there for the most part, and it was fun because it was like you were already watching playoff hockey, and I think that's probably what some fans are kind of growing tired of, is like, well, okay, but other teams are playing playoff hockey. Other teams have been missing a lot more players, because that's one thing that obviously that the injury bug kind of bit, and at kind of a bad time. But the Red Wings were by far had the least games missed of their players of anybody in that pre-Olympic period. So you imagine that the numbers were going to catch up with them some, and it still didn't end up being that bad. At first, it kind of looked like it could have gotten too bad, but it really didn't get that bad. The guys came back, but then then Falk goes down. But it does seem like, because to your point, it's a great analogy with the Pistons. I mean, there's 5 to 8 guys on a lot of those rosters, but they have all 12 guys playing like this, plus the guys that come up from the G League and everything else. Anybody that puts on that uniform, they're playing like that, and that's why even when they have 5 guys that basically only one maybe permanent starter and then 4 bench players, they still are pretty competitive because they're given that effort, and that's the part that you can continue to do. You might not always have your best slap shot, or you might not be skating to your maximum level, but you can always have that effort and kind of make your own make your own luck in that case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what's the extra frustrating piece, because we've seen so many young guys come through on the roster so far this year. With Finney and Casper in particular, they've been the mainstays with Axel Sandin Pelika. I know we talked about a couple of those guys pretty heavily in our last conversation. You had Brantig Nygaard, who's been back and forth. What I wish we were seeing more of them in prominent roles. Finney's been seeing some ice time back on the top line recently, which is fantastic because he's just playing at such a high level. But then you even look at guys like Dominic Shine, Dries, John Leonard when he was in the roster, Mazur the last couple games, he finally got some ice time. I feel like, to your point with the Pistons and guys filling roles, they're coming in and bringing an extra level of intensity that we're sort of lacking. And unfortunately, a lot of that lacking to me is from your veteran group. I'm not saying Larkin, I mean, he's playing seems like on half of a functional body right now. But then you look at DeBrincat, who's having a breakout season. Lucas Raymond, I'm still convinced, is actually hurt. You could argue that Sider, it's funny that I'm mentioning some of these guys as veterans because 2 are 23 and 24 years old. But you look at the rest of the group, like Patrick Kane should be one of your go-to guys. He had a great moment that other night against Minnesota, tying the game. But then a couple minutes later, he makes probably the dumbest possible penalty of the season that could cost him the season. And you look at Kopp, he's gone back and forth. I think he's really elevated his game this year. But then you have James Van Riemsdyk, JT Compher, I think guys that have just kind of gone quiet. I'll give props to Compher the last couple of games. When Larkin was out in particular, he really finally stepped up into a role where I think you would imagine him being more so the entire season rather than just in small little spurts. But that, to me, has been one of the more frustrating contracts. Mason Appleton, for instance, another guy that's been around for a long time. He had a great start to the season when he had to get elevated because of injuries, but then he's just basically been there. I mean, you kind of relate it to the comments from Todd McClellan, where a lot of guys are just jerseys, and there's too many names that you can look at right now that you would be like, yeah, that checks out.
Well, especially because, I mean, obviously we're based here in Grand Rapids, and I know you guys, are buddies with, the Hockeytown West guys, and we're seeing all this talent that's running around here, and I know it doesn't always transfer, and I know that some of those guys are more built for Grand Rapids, but there is a lot in this pipeline. That's the eternal hope, to a degree, of the whole Yzerplan situation. He has gotten a lot of young guys and a lot of young talent, and we're continuing to see it. And we have a lot of folks come on the show and talk about a lot of these young guys, and there is reason to be hopeful, but that also then pushes out the hope, because then people say, well, but yeah, we were really planning on making the playoffs, though, and breaking that streak and getting in. But it was nice to see the infusion of Finney and some of those names that we talked about. But at the same time, I was kind of surprised that we didn't see a little bit more, especially after maybe there was some stale play from some of the veterans.
Yeah, agreed. And you look at some of the other teams out there right now, like Philly, for instance. We just played them. That Porter Matone, did I say that correctly? The Michigan State stud that just got signed to his deal with Philadelphia. He comes in. He had a heck of a game against Detroit. And then you looked, I think it was last night, I forget who Philly was up against, but he's out there on a 5-on-3 power play in overtime. And he's basically playing the Larkin bumper spot right there between the dots. and as the game-winning goal. Like, there's certain teams that are really leaning heavier into that youth push. And I'm not saying that's at a fault for Detroit per se, because we talked about DeBrincat, Raymond, and Larkin and what they can do, but there's that extra little boost of these young guys, and we've seen it at times from Finney several times, I think, this year. Casper, not as much maybe this year as we saw maybe in comparison to last season, but they're trusting them, I think, is the point I'm trying to get to go out and make something happen, where it seems that Todd has been a little bit hesitant. I think his hand was forced this past weekend with Falk going down, as you mentioned earlier, and ASP was brought back into the lineup, and he definitely was seeing a heavier workload than before he got sent down, which I think played to his advantage, but it was still, in the Minnesota game, only 15 minutes, which is crazy to me, because it seemed like every time he was out there, something pretty decent was happening. He had a goal and assist. But it's like, lean into him, but try not to stretch him out too far. It's a fine line that they're trying to dance on, and honestly, I wish they would just rip the Band-Aid off.
Exactly, because I do like the idea that they might play their way into. Yeah, sure, you're going to get some. If you lean on young guys, you're going to get some mistakes, and you're going to get some plays where it's like, okay, well, yeah, a veteran probably wouldn't have made that play, but some of these guys that we're talking about are some of the culprits that have made some of the mistakes that have stuck out, like a Mason Appleton or some others, and so. At the same time, it's like, okay, well, if we can get that juice in there, because Finney has been up and down, and obviously he was a big story at the beginning of the season, and his play has been up and down, but his energy has not been up and down. It's been up and up and up. It has not gone down. And yeah, the other stuff is going to be inconsistent. You have to plan on that for a guy that he has that level of experience and is that age, but at the same time, his energy is clearly making some things happen, even on days where he's a little out of sync or out of place.
Yeah, I think that's the tough one, right? Because you look at Finney, and he's always involved in, like, typically in the right situation. But we've seen, like, the Florida game, for instance, where Detroit just had that late game collapse, and he was unfortunately one of the main culprits in that odd man rush coming back the other way that led to the redirect off of Falk's stick and into the net, and that's what they ultimately lost the game on. So you've got the growing pains piece, but the energy aspect that we're seeing from him, I mean, you're still seeing it from ASP, even though he's gone back and forth. And to be honest, I think that the Olympic break was a godsend for a lot of these younger players that haven't played at this level of intensity in this many games before, because it seems like Finney's been just a whole new person since they came back from the Olympic break in particular. And Branson Nygaard, for that matter, him going back and forth, you can see the energy and the effort. And I just love the way that he goes and throws a body. But he's also got probably one of the most dangerous shots in the organization right now. So it's tough, because 5 games left. You got Finney, who's averaging 15 and a half minutes a night. Do you try to elevate that these final couple of games? Because Larkin, he's struggling. And I know that they made the comments on the broadcast, I think it was against the Rangers, where they're trying to put some of those, like Casper and Finney in particular, and Raymond for that matter, on the line with him, because he just doesn't have the get up and go that we're used to him having. And it's a hindrance to him, to the roster. But you can't help but applaud him for putting that effort in there and then you look at the rest of a lot of the roster, and you're just like, hey, your captain's trying to literally will you guys to a victory. How about you help him out a little bit?
Exactly. Well, I was worried about this a little bit. I remember saying this before the Olympic break, because I know a lot of people were clamoring for Kane, and obviously he's had a great season and a kind of a storybook season to a degree with all of the personal accolades, but I was worried about the mileage that it was going to put on him. And I remember even tying that to Larkin, because although he's not Kane's age, he's still a more veteran player, that those things add up more. And even for some of the young guys, like you're talking about with Raymond, how he might be, you're going to be more likely to pick some mileage up if you're having to play these extra games and not get the rest. So I wouldn't be surprised if they are ailing, but like you said, Larkin is putting in the effort, even if he is physically ailing, a decent amount. So we'll see how the stretch goes. Like I said, it's probably kind of a win out scenario, but hopefully they can get some things going here. But I do encourage people to listen to the podcast, because although this has been a little bit more morose, I guess, than how some of the other segments throughout the year, that's the stage we're at, and they're given the reality of the situation, and still hopeful for the future. The last podcast still covered some of the young guys like Augustine and Plant, and guys that are playing well. But want to make sure to direct people to the podcast and to all the social media stuff, so people can follow you here.
Yeah, you can find us at Grindline Pod. So that's actually across all the social media platforms. Our main go-to is X. We're on Instagram, Facebook. You'll see Greg is typically behind a lot of the postings on X, and he loves to interact with folks, if you haven't noticed before. We're on all the listening platforms, at iTunes, Spotify in particular. We have a collection going with Vintage Detroit still, which is vintagedetroit.com. They do a lot of the jersey customizations for any of your pro sports, and I think they still do some University of Michigan stuff as well, in Michigan State. But those are the highlights for the podcast.
Did you take my idea of getting the cap?
I didn't go the cap right yet. No, shoot. I know we talked about that last time, and I was actually pretty excited for it, but I didn't follow through, so that's on me.
I think we determined that it was a driver's cap. There's still some disagreement of if that's actually it here at the station, but that was what the research showed. But I would say this: I think if during this stretch where they have been a little bit on, kind of going downhill, if we had the cap night where everybody was wearing those, that would have pumped them all up. That would have the trend would have gone up after that. So that's what they needed. Yeah.
You're saying we dropped the ball. I get it. It's cool.
No, not you guys. Yeah, we could obviously put it on them on the ice, but yeah, they needed a boost, and we had the idea, but yeah, they just weren't able to execute it. But no, check out that stuff too, because that is cool stuff at the stuff at Vintage Detroit and everything. It's great stuff. But appreciate you coming on, and yeah, we'll be talking more hockey. We might be running out of season here, but whether it's preparing for the hopeful nature of next season, we'll talk to you about some more pucks soon here.
Yeah, no, sounds great. I wish it was more positive aura coming into this one, but I appreciate you having me on.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll have you on again, and I appreciate you coming on.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, thanks. Thanks to Ryan Randall. Appreciate him coming on and talking about the Red Wings here. We're a little bit behind. I got to check in with Dan. I got to see what's going on. We got to have a quick segment with him and here in studio and see. He's got too many headphones in his ear. He's got multiple headphones. I don't know what's going on with him. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Wanted to check in with Dan here. He's got all of his headphones off now. That you had you had like 10 headphones on.
Yeah, for the video podcast, I didn't want to feel self-conscious, so I made changes based on what you said. So I'm going to Williams Chiropractic and say I wear too many headphones.
They'll help fix that. Wait, are you self-conscious about your ears? Is that why you cover?
No, I listen to multiple things. I was listening to you on the phone, and then the Tigers game.
Oh, okay.
Well, so I can't do them through the same headphone.
How's the Tigers game going? I haven't been checking.
0-0, I think. Now they're going into like the fourth. Yeah. So Myers loaded the bases, but got out of it. So.
Okay.
It's just 17-degree wind chill in Minnesota. It looks like it's miserable to play baseball. So
that sounds kind of miserable. They've had some good days for weather, all things considered.
Opening day was beautiful. Between all those storms, it was pretty impressive. And then they got a game in on Saturday, and still, even though they called it, they won it. So
I remember going to one of the opening days, and it was literally snowing, because that's obviously a possibility for a Detroit opening day.
Yeah, I went to the opening day of Comerica Park, like the first ever opening day. I think Brian Mueller was on the mound, and the two people in the party, I was like 13. When it happened, they went to Hockey Town in like the second inning. They were just like, we're not going to sit out here for this. So they watched the game across the street that they had tickets to at Hockey Town. So it can be pretty bad.
Well, yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad we're not at this particular game. That's probably not a good one. I'm done with the colder weather, anyways. I think we need to be done.
Yeah, I'm
with
ready
it.
for spring. I know it's technically spring, but I'm ready for it to feel like
yeah,
spring.
Yeah. I think we got to be there, and hopefully that'll bring us here. Now, the one thing that I wanted to mention to you, I'm glad we checked in on the baseball game, but usually when we have these food segments, especially with Big G, I tend to make him mad with my food takes because I'll mention something random and kind of expand the possibilities out. Like when we were talking about
caramel popcorn. Popcorn is what you eat.
You got to go see Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I do have so caramel popcorn did expand into movie theater popcorn, kettle corn,
yeah,
a tin of corn, crisp gifting policies. So yeah,
corn nuts. You could have corn nuts.
Yeah.
Well, and now I'm looking at a place that they have dark chocolate sea salted caramel popcorn, and
that sounds like candy. That sounds fine.
They have cinnamon roll popcorn.
Yeah, that's not popcorn.
Peanut butter cup popcorn.
I would eat all of that.
Yeah, I mean it sounds good. See, this is where he would start yelling, "Oh, mint chocolate chip popcorn."
Yeah,
that's a good one.
I've never thought mint and chocolate should go together.
Really?
Why?
Oh,
why?
You're
going to brush my teeth and then eat a Snickers. Like what? Give me a Hershey's bar after some mouthwash. Thanks.
You're gonna anger the third person that's in the studio with us here. She's a big mint chocolate fan.
Yeah, you can go to wherever York mints were made and go to your little party, but I will not be joining you.
York, Pennsylvania. Fun fact. That's where they were made.
That makes sense. So yeah, go to York, Pennsylvania.
That is a good place to find the candy. You got York, you got Hershey. That's just where all the candy comes from.
Head north to New York because that's probably what they based it off of. So, chocolate and mint, things that shouldn't go together.
You heard it here. New York was based off of the York peppermint patty. That's what we're going with. This ended up being a fun segment. I'm glad we did this. Now we're going to bring on Brady Fredericksen and try to get ourselves back together here and try to get him to go to Williams Chiropractic, even though he's not from the area. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're happy to bring on this next guest because we've been a little bit more of a bummer than we typically are on this show. Not the last segment though, because we just talked about popcorn for most of the segment. But and Dan sent my mom to York to go get peppermint patties, so she'll be back next week. But happy to bring Brady Fredericksen on because it's funny. We've been talking about the Red Wings and the Tigers and how the feeling around them hasn't necessarily been the most positive. I would argue that the feeling around the Pistons should be more positive than it is, even though they're atop the conference here and they've clinched. But Brady, as you know, we celebrate the thing of the day. I already alluded to it. It's National Caramel Popcorn Day. So I'm curious if you have a favorite popcorn or a favorite way to eat popcorn, or you combine it with something. There's a bunch of iterations there.
Oh God, that's a great question. The last time I just made popcorn for the first time like a week ago, and I torched it to the point that I had to like open all the windows because there was so much smoke. I would say I'm just like a cheddar popcorn guy. Like that's just keep it simple. Like that's my go-to, I think.
That's a classic. I did have a faulty microwave situation where I tried to cook a bag of popcorn in my dorm, and it basically like smoked out the entire floor of the dorm. So I know how you feel because then all the guys were asking me, what were you doing in there? It's like, no, I was just trying to cook popcorn. They're like, sure, okay, whatever you say. But yeah, that's a good one. There's a lot of classics with it. We were going into some crazy flavors, but they were basically just becoming candy at that point. So that's more of a classic savory flavor there. But I want to talk some Pistons with you because it's funny to me, like I said, with the Tigers and the Red Wings segments, I was kind of scolding the fans a little bit on the Tigers thing because it's so early in the season and there's already some malaise and people getting down. I get it with the Wings. They're kind of scuffling down the stretch, but with the Wings analyst that I talked to, I actually used the comparison of the Pistons. And I said, one of the things that we're used to as Detroit fans is we're used to consistent, solid effort. The Lions, you're never gonna fault them, especially in the Stan Campbell era, for not giving maximum effort. Arguably, they might be giving too much effort and getting hurt because of tough practices and all those kinds of things. They're giving a lot of effort. And the Pistons are the same way. The Red Wings, it seems a little less consistent. But the Pistons, whether they have injuries, whether they're going deep in the depth chart, which they like to do, or have to do at times, but it's been going very well for them. The effort is very consistent, and it is remarkable. No matter what lineup combination you throw out there, and this has got to be one of the teams that's leading the league, other than maybe the tanking teams that keep throwing in these mismatched pieces, of the top teams in the league, they've got to be leading in the most lineup combinations because they just keep throwing out different combinations, but they keep working.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of amazing considering where they're at in the standings, that they have had to tinker with so many different things, whether it was Cade being out early in the season or late in the season, or any variety of things in the midst of it. But their consistency with that in terms of being able to just kind of seamlessly plug in and plug out has been impressive. And I think there's going to be obviously some nights like tonight they're not clicking very well. But I think you just look at when those guys are out there. I do think that the benefit of how many guys the bigger staff typically plays, I think it shines through in situations like that, because you can see chemistry among guys who, if you're only playing 8 or 9 guys a night, probably aren't seeing the floor very much together. Whereas if you're playing, 10 or 11 guys like the Pistons tend to do, those guys do see more time out there. So I think, over the course of the season, you start to see the kind of that chemistry blossom from top all the way to bottom.
That's a great point, because I don't think it's talked about enough, the continuity that this team has for how many pieces they keep throwing in there. I think that was one of the fundamental issues with Ivy, and I know there's a lot of explanations for it. The fact that, that he had the back-to-back injuries, and then basically he was out while the whole team. I always use the analogy with him that the train had left the station, and he was trying to keep up with a moving train, and it just didn't work. He was out of sync with it, and obviously he clearly had maybe some other things going on, but that was tough to keep up with the flow of the game. But then you have these other pieces that go in there, whether they're from the G League or other depth pieces, a guy like Javonte Green that kind of gets thrown in the mix, and you think, okay, this guy's probably not going to see a lot of time, and he's seen a decent amount of minutes. He's been up in an important part of the team, and he's thrived. A lot of these guys have thrived, and it is amazing that the combinations don't seem to matter. You just put 5 out there, and they seem to play pretty well, which that cohesion should bode well for the playoffs here.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. You look at like the start of the season. We were talking a lot about Javonte Green and that first stretch of games, and Danius Jenkins, and kind of where did these guys come from, and look at how they're fitting in. And then there's obviously the ebbs and flows of the season, and there's probably a stretch of 20, 25 games where those guys both kind of just fade out of the rotation, and like they're not playing but maybe 10 minutes a night. And then obviously injuries always come back, and here they are back in the rotation or back in significant roles, and they're thriving again. So I think it just goes back to especially for those two. I think it's funny because Javonte Green's not a young guy, he's kind of a journeyman, but definitely has that sort of veteran mentality of just being ready when your number's called. And then you've got the young guy in Jenkins who, I don't think knows any better because of the way that, I think the way that he kind of came up in college playing for Rick Pitino and playing at a small school then a big school and going from Ionia to St. John's. He's, a guy that I think too had to earn and fight and claw and be ready for his number to be called. So I think both those guys kind of have the same mentality, even though they are kind of in different, spots in the rotation and their careers.
Oh, yeah, we were talking about that with the Red Wings segment where we were comparing them to the Pistons, that Danis almost had the opposite problem of the lack of effort. It was almost like when he got signed to the contract, then it was almost like he was pushing too hard. It was like, okay, just, you made it. Now let's have let's smooth this thing out. But he's been scratching and clawing, and so you can understand why he would still have that tenacity, and that is a good thing. But it almost seemed like he had reached kind of a fever pitch with it. And now I do think as long as obviously the big asterisk to this statement is Cade returning to form and getting his conditioning up to speed and being able to get in the flow by the playoffs. But you can see how this has benefited a lot of other players. We've seen different players flourish. It makes sense that Danis has kind of gotten his groove back because he's got more consistent minutes, and that's when he played well initially, is when he was filling in for Cade and getting consistent minutes. And you mentioned some of the other names, but there's probably one name that I wouldn't have necessarily seen a direct effect between a Cade injury and a huge uptick, but that's Tobias Harris. He's really hit his groove in this stretch where Cade's been out.
Yeah, I think I remember I posted something on Twitter where it was like if one player had a random triple-double with Cade out, who would you guess? And I think I put down like Danis and Asar and Jalen Duren and Tobias, and I think there was like 80, 90 votes on it, and I think Tobias Harris got like 1.5%, and I remember I tweeted after that, I was like, I think that might be the guy, and he has flirted with it at times, throughout this, and I think that I don't think you think of Tobias Harris as being a creator of sorts. I don't think he's a guy who's going to like take it off the dribble and create offense for others. But I think when you look at the way the Pistons have been playing, and especially with like the chemistry between Danis Jenkins, Tobias, and Jalen Duren, I think a lot of the production that Tobias has seen as a kind of creator has come off of like secondary feeds where he gets the ball on the wing, he kind of does his little post-up thing, turns toward the basket, and everyone expects him to shoot because, frankly, that's what he's there to do. And he's done a really good job of finding guys and finding cutters and being able to swing it back out. And I think, it's really opened things up. And I hope that, when you look at situations like this, same thing with Jenkins and obviously him having the ball in his hands so much, you look at those two things and it's like, man, that would be great kind of escape valves for them to have come playoff time when, the going gets tough and Cade's getting, doubled and trapped at half court. But, I do hope that it's kind of something that like they can still work on in the immediacy once Cade hopefully comes back, and hopefully in that first round series that hopefully again is not, anything rocky. But I think if they can kind of get a groove with how that secondary creation is happening now, once Cade's back, I do think that would help them immensely against the trio of Boston and Cleveland and New York.
For sure. Well, and there's two things that makes me think of too, because the one is that statement that you said about Tobias, I feel like that could be said about a lot of players on this team. Obviously, Cade is known as a very good passer, as he should be. He's one of the better players and creators in the game, but it's interesting when he's out and then how that gets shifted, because then usage gets shifted to other players. When there's a lot of usage that's out, then that gets shifted to other players, and it doesn't always disseminate evenly. You get some passing that then goes to Harris, but you could say that same thing about, I don't think guys like Duren and Stewart and some of the other guys get enough credit for their passing. I think Cade's kind of the engine that pumps all of that, even if he's not on the floor. The fact that he's very unselfish as the star player, as the leader of the team, I think that helps raise everybody else's awareness of that. But it is a very good passing team. They get a reputation as bruisers and as defenders, and they're going to rebound and outwork you. But there's some pretty smooth passing in this offense when you kind of drill down to it.
Yeah, I think that's just a byproduct of not having, 2 or 3 guys on the perimeter who can get their own shot and score at will. I think you look at a lot of other teams like, the Bostons, who have guys who they can just, 3 guys they can just give the ball to and get out of the way. Pistons don't necessarily have that outside of Cade, and so I think there is a lot more, need to be able to kind of create offense for others, and I think they've done a good job of that holistically across the board. But I think even if you look at last year, it hasn't really shown itself this season, but, towards the end of the last year, Jalen Duren was kind of serving more as a facilitator than he was a scorer. Obviously, they've needed him to be a scorer, and he has more than stepped up in that regard this season, but especially in the last month. But I think last year there were times where they were running a lot of offense, specifically when they had Malik Beasley with kind of dribble handoffs at the top of the key, and it was allowing Duren to kind of just operate in this high-low where he could kind of pick his poison on where he wanted to go. And I think that maybe the reason they haven't done so much of that is because Duran's just an immensely better scorer this season than he was last year. But I think also when you had the shooters they had last year with Hardaway and Beasley, guys who weren't just going to stand there and shoot, but could really take the ball off the dribble if they needed to too. I think it opened up different things. So it shows some evolution in their offense, but I think that's one area where I think, if again in the playoffs when things get, more condensed, I think that's an element that we might see kind of resurface in some way.
I could see that too. I want to, we got to take a quick break, but I want to return to the other part of that discussion, which is the improvement in these other players with Cade out, and then kind of compounding that when he comes back in, and then what that will mean for the playoff run here. But we'll come back with Brady Fredericksen of Detroit Bad Boys. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Brady Fredericksen, having a good conversation about the Pistons and kind of ramping up to the playoffs here, which is where the conversation's going, because obviously we're getting ready for it. And I am wondering, because I always look at this, I'm going to put it kind of in a formula, I guess, where when there is a key injury to one of the more important players on the team that has a lot of usage and a lot of the offense and a lot of the team goes through them, which obviously Cade, that's one of the higher ones in the league as far as what he does for the team. So that spread out a bunch of usage, but it's like if that then improved, now we're seeing some measurable improvement in some of the other players. Danis is back. We talked about that. We talked about Tobias improving some of his playmaking, and Duran has gotten more. He's trying to take on kind of that mantle of the number one scorer and the go-to guy, and being more aggressive, and there's a lot of usage that's spreading out. But it's like if that usage went up by 50%, say, in those guys, obviously when Cade comes back, he's going to take a lot of the usage back. But you hope that they're still 25% better, 10% better than they were before that, because they got in the groove, they elevated their game, and then that rising tide lifted all the boats. But I'm curious, because I was reading an article that you guys did. I was refreshing my mind from it. I had read it before, but it was talking about the trade deadline, and you guys were giving your trade deadline grades, and I think you gave a D+. And obviously that was at the time kind of made sense. And then you were talking about playoff hopes. And I'm wondering how those two things have evolved with kind of what we're seeing from the team, what we've seen from the team in the second half, and then also what we've seen from Herter, because I think it was kind of an unknown. Do we see a couple years ago Herter? Do we see more recent Herter? It made sense that Cade and this offense would kind of improve him. Now he's another one that's gotten more usage and gotten more in the flow because more minutes have been allocated to him. But I'm curious kind of where you're at now headed into the playoffs, now that we've seen the majority of the regular season.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020. If we knew what we knew about Jaden Ivey's situation now, I think that D+ would have been quite a bit higher. But I think, Herter's, I think in the last 5 to 6 games, he's really kind of proven himself in this rotation. He's gotten more comfortable. I think he's kind of, it was a matter of time, I think. There was this weird narrative around the sort of like loyalty that J.B. Bickerstaff had to Karis LeVert, and I think there was a lot of things that, were happening around the trade deadline with Karis LeVert. I think he had vertigo, and there was just like, the situation where like they needed to find somebody else to kind of supplement that Ivy thing, because they were clearly trying to get out of that. But LeVert wasn't going over because nobody is going to trade for a guy who's dealing with, something that they can't play with. So I think that kind of was an awkward kind of addition with what they already had. But I do think, LeVert's play has been so up and down at times, and he's had some really good games and some really bad games. But, I think Herter's just a lot steadier of a player. I'm surprised how much I'm impressed by him as kind of an all-around guy. I knew that he wasn't just a shooter, but I do think he has an ability to hold his own defensively, which I didn't quite expect. I think when I look back maybe 4 games ago against the Lakers on the last kind of couple plays of that game, there was a drive where, the Pistons were, I think, clinging onto a lead, and Luka Doncic kind of drove into the paint, and he had a switch on Herter, and Herter held his own and forced a miss at the rim, which, and didn't foul, which I think is impressive in its own right, especially considering who that is at the time. So, he's been impressive. I think his shot's coming around a little bit too. He's got 2 threes tonight, so he's starting to shoot a little better too, which is good. They'll need that. I think if he can be shooting the ball even better than he is right now come playoffs, I think that'll be a really big addition. But, yeah, I mean, I think my expectations are probably still the same. I think they're just a team with a ceiling, and I don't know if that ceiling is the Eastern Conference Finals or if it's losing in the finals. I mean, I would prefer, obviously, the finals in any capacity. But even if they lost in the second round, like I still think that if they somehow get matched up with the Cavaliers in the second round, I think that's a very weird matchup for them, just with the amount of guard play that the Cavs can throw at you and with all that Evan Mobley can do. I think that's just a bad matchup. I think if they ended up playing the Knicks in the second round, I'd feel pretty confident that they're going to the Eastern Conference Finals. And if they play Boston, then I think it's going to be just a war. So, each of those teams presents a really interesting, matchup. And even some of the teams in the play-in that they might have to play in the first round, like I certainly don't want to play Miami. That's been one of the few teams in the league that has given the Pistons a lot of trouble this season. So it'll be interesting to see who they kind of match up with. I think that roadmap will tell a lot about their kind of postseason fortunes.
I agree, and that does kind of match up. I was checking the odds today just to kind of get a refresh on where the Pistons kind of rank as far as likelihood to make the finals, because I do think they're a little bit. I mean, I think you're being honest and authentic and correct about how you're viewing it as far as like you cover the Pistons. Obviously, you want to see them do well, but you have to have a level of objectivity too and see them for what they are. But I also think that they could kind of surprise some people as far as, especially from a national standpoint, because they are still at the top. They're at the top. They earned that. They were consistent throughout the season with some injury issues, with the rotation issues. The rotation thing is one of the most fascinating things to me, because I want to see what they do, because that's been one of their main advantages is, you put them up against a Cleveland, and, if you measure 1, 2, and 3 against 1, 2, and 3 there, it might not stack up quite as even. But then once you get down to the depth, and Cleveland's got some depth too, but Detroit's one of the deeper teams in the league, but that doesn't always have an effect in the playoffs, more from an lack of attrition standpoint, where you're not having as many injuries or you can survive the injuries, but those rotations are usually shortened too. So we'll have to see what they do, but that's been one of their advantages. But I do think that they're going to be a tough out no matter who they play. I do think that Cleveland, I don't think Boston had better odds than them, but I think Cleveland and New York both had better odds to make the finals. And then obviously a bunch of teams in the West were pretty. OKC was the highest, and then San Antonio wasn't too far behind. Some obvious ones from that side. But I am curious to see how this goes, but I do like the style play. I know that's been a discussion point of, I've heard a lot from the national pundits where they're talking about, well, their style of play, it's not really going to be conducive to the playoffs because everybody else is going to, intensify as well, and so they're not going to have the effort advantage like they do in the regular season. But defense travels, their style travels, and I do think that if you're playing in a 7-game series with them, I think you're going to get worn down. I think they're going to wear other teams down if you're having to play them, because these other teams are getting a break. They're going and playing them, and then they're getting to play somebody else. They're getting to play the Wizards in between or whatever, and then go back and play them. If you have to play them 7 games in a row, if that's what the series gets to, I think teams are going to get beat up.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of been a weird shift of initially when the Pistons jumped out to, such a hot start, it was kind of like, oh, this is cute, good for them. And then I think at some point in time, people started to take notice and said, oh, this team is legit. And then, somewhere between the trade deadline and then not making some sort of big move, and I'm not even convinced there was a big move to be made, but I think somewhere between that combined with Cade getting hurt, it kind of brought back the narrative that they're just this Mickey Mouse team that plays hard and that's the only reason they're good. And I think that's kind of false. And I think to say that the Thunder are the better version or an optimized version of what the Pistons are in terms of style of play and kind of construction. And they're better in every way, don't get me wrong. But I don't think that people ever at some point, even 2 years ago when the Thunder were the number one seed in the West and they lost to the Nuggets in 7 games in the second round, I don't think that people were talking about the Thunder as being this sort of rinky-dink thing. I think, you have to look at it from the perspective, too, of, the Pistons haven't been relevant to this level in so long that I think, anytime you see a team come from basically nowhere, because I don't think there's anybody who expected this team to go from the 6th seed to the 1 seed like this quickly. There's obviously always going to be some skepticism there. So, I do think they'll need to break that, but I think all they have to do is, play their game. And I don't think that, like, magically the team that plays the absolute hardest in the league is going to have its effort matched and its defense is going to fall apart. Like, I just don't foresee that being how it goes down. I still think they're going to have a pretty sizable advantage in both of those fronts because, I think until you get later on in the playoffs, you're still going to have teams that are, frankly, mediocre to not that great.
Especially because there is a big thing about attrition in the playoffs as far as injuries go, but I do think that it could almost be, it was evident in the different seasons with the Lions from 2 seasons ago to this season. You had that, whatever you want to call it, the Honolulu flu or whatever, because they were physically imposing their will on other teams. And although, yes, you're going to get fouls called on you and everybody's getting beat up and the playoffs are going to be tough no matter what, I do think the Pistons brand of basketball could inherently wear some of these other guys down, where if you do match up with a Cleveland, yeah, Harden's going to draw a lot of fouls. Those guys are going to draw a lot of fouls, but they're going to take some punishment as a result. And when you're not always putting in that maximum effort on the defensive end, or can be somewhat lackadaisical at times if you're a Harden and some of those players and some of Cleveland as a whole, then that might show where, okay, they come out to a 2-1 lead, but then Detroit kind of wears down. It'll be interesting to see, especially because we don't know what that rotation's gonna look like and how deep they're gonna go. I don't think that Bickerstaff is going to be afraid to say, okay, this isn't working, so I'm going to insert a guy that maybe hasn't been playing and kind of get some juice in here. Maybe we'll see more Javonte Green after we haven't seen him because he just wants some juice out there, or Paul Reed because he wants to save some fouls from the big guys or whatever. But they have those pieces that he can mix and match. So it'll be interesting. But I appreciate you coming on and talking with us about it. A great conversation about it. Want to make sure to direct people to where they can follow you here, and especially as the playoffs start to ramp up.
Yeah, stuff's on DetroitBadBoys.com, and then you can follow me on Twitter at Brady_Fred.
Be sure to follow them, the Detroit Bad Boys. They've got a lot of good writers there, and we have a lot of them on the show, and including Brady, and be sure to follow him, and we appreciate you coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Brady. Thanks to Brady Fredericksen. Great stuff there. Great conversation about the Pistons. We're going to take a quick break and then come back in studio with Dan and his headphones. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Just want to thank them and the rest of our sponsors: Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, Williams Chiropractic, I-Corps, and West Michigan Sports Commission. Appreciate their support. Appreciate the guests that came on. Good stuff from all of them. Brady Fredericksen, Ryan Randall, and Jerry Mackinem. And I appreciate Dan and all his headphones keeping us on track here. You needed a lot of headphones to keep me on track. That was the problem. I was off track, and you needed a lot of headphones.
I need as many headphones as you need drinks. So,
well, that's a lot.
I think it's fair.
That's a lot. 2. Well, yeah, I have 2 on the desk, and then I have 1 underneath. These are different kinds of teas,
so, yeah.
And then I have a water down here too.
So yeah, my multiple headphones versus your 3 drinks.
Well,
multiple teas. I have as many headphones as you have teas.
I've noticed this. See, this is a problem. We always like to talk about the studio and nobody can see it until we do the video. But I can't see what you have going on anymore because we have these screens in between us now. You don't want to see as much of my face. I'm like Wilson from Home Improvement. You want to just see me on that because you don't want to see my ugly face. I got a face for radio, so you just want to see my eyes.
Yeah, it is like Wilson from Home Improvement. I actually like these monitors they've added to the studio that nobody can see because now I can make my favorite hand gesture to you when you bring up my headphones and you don't know. And it's therapeutic for me.
You give me a thumbs up over there. I appreciate it.
Yes, that's exactly what I was doing. It was a solo finger salute, so. But yeah, I mean, I was about to make a personal plea to Dr. Williams on the air to fix a broken heart from all the bullying I've received. But
I mean, you're talking about you're receiving bullying. I believe I didn't even say anything about Mom because you sent her to York. She went now. She's en route to York, Pennsylvania.
A luxury made-up vacation to the land of mint and chocolate that she could be in near heaven. Because apparently those are the two tastes that bring her to complete ecstasy. So I don't know what else she needs. I'm doing people favors. You're over here calling out the way people look and wear and everything. So I don't know. Condescend to somebody else, Mr. Walsh.
She called me in the last break, and she told me she's in Ohio already, headed to Pennsylvania since you sent her over there.
Did we have like a bullet train installed between Pennsylvania and Michigan?
Yeah, she drives fast.
Okay. I have listened to her. I think one night she was listening to Hell's Bells when I went out in the parking lot, and I'm like,
yeah, she gets jamming, and that pedal goes.
So that makes sense.
Goes right to the metal.
Well, good for her.
I, for the record, was complimenting the headphones. I think it's impressive that you can have that many headphones and be listening to all that. I barely can wear the one pair when we've got the that's why I like doing these segments because I don't have to have them on now to talk to you.
For someone who's received as much training as you, I feel like toggling should be right in your wheelhouse to be able to listen, look, observe. Like, I mean, observe and report. I don't know if like I said, I have not been trained by the highest of minds, but observe and report should be able to be anybody's.
We still have to go on a mission. I don't like our camaraderie currently because you're now sad and wanting to call Dr. Williams for, I don't know if he fixes a broken heart. He does work on the mind. But his mantra is that men are the cause of all the ails because it's MEN, it's an acronym. But in this case, I guess it is me, so I am a man. So I guess it applies.
Well, that's fair. I lash out when I'm hurt by the ones I trust, and I was going to say adore and love, but that is no longer there. So maybe I'll go to not Hershey, Pennsylvania. I could.
You're going to go to Hershey?
What? Yeah. Then maybe there's a Mint, Pennsylvania, and we can bring them together and complete joy.
Well, yeah. So you're not gonna go to York because you're gonna try to avoid Mom. I see that. You're not gonna go to York.
Chocolate and mint together. That was all that was about.
Well, who knew we were going to get here with this? This is always fun when we get to these random places. Dan is acting sensitive, but I'm not believing how sensitive he is. He's usually the one dishing it out in the breaks in the studio here, but want to preview the rest of the Jethro lineup here because we got a lot of good stuff coming up. We got the sports professor. Be sure to tune into him. He's going to read all the 60. I think all 60. The whole show is just going to be 60 score predictions, I think.
Yeah.
On Wednesday.
Yeah. I'll give him more credit than that.
Well, it's going to take him a while to do it. That's why I was.
Yeah, I get it.
That's why I was saying that. But then we've got Shane Graham's Extra Points on Thursday, 7 to 9. Sports Project again, 10 to 12 on Saturday, and then tune in to us next week, 7 to 9. Yeah. And hopefully Dan will be back sometime, or maybe he's going to quit. I don't know.
No, I'll be here for I think an Extra Points in a couple of weeks, and then I got Steve 2 times, so I get a variety this month.
He's requesting less of me so I don't hurt his feelings quite as much. But we appreciate you joining us, especially before the game. Enjoy the big game tonight. And like I said, it'll be covered here on Wednesday. Steve will be covering it. So tune in then and tune in to us next week. And until then, stay informed and stay vigilant.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, Williams Chiropractic, I-Core, the West Michigan Sports Commission.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.